Level 1. The civilian. You are 26. A man in a gray suit slides a folder across the desk and asks if you are willing to disappear. Not die, disappear. There's a difference, he says. He doesn't explain what it is. It's June 1942. Washington, D.C. is loud with uniforms, recruitment posters, and the particular kind of urgency that a country at war manufactures overnight. You are not a soldier. You never were. You're a lawyer from Philadelphia with a working knowledge of French, a Princeton degree, and the ability to lie convincingly under pressure, a skill you developed long before anyone told you it had a name. The man across the desk is William Donovan. Most people call him Wild Bill. He doesn't look wild. He looks like someone who has already decided and is simply waiting for you to catch up. He tells you that the Office of Strategic Services needs a specific kind of person, not the kind that marches in formation or follows a manual, the kind that nobody looks at twice, the kind that walks into a room full of enemies and makes them feel like he belongs there. He says the Army builds soldiers out of young men with good bodies and good discipline. What he's building, he says, requires something harder to train. He slides a second document across the table. You don't ask what it is. You can read. What you can't do is ask questions about it. Not today. Not ever. The OSS was created by Roosevelt's order 6 weeks ago. It has no history, no precedent, no real structure yet. What it has is a mandate to operate behind enemy lines, to gather intelligence, to disrupt and deceive and disappear, to fight a war that never appears in any newspaper. Donovan leans back. He tells you that the perfect spy is the person nobody suspects. He looks at you when he says it, not at your file, at you. You think about your father, who came back from the last war and never talked about it. You think about what it means to do something that nobody will ever know you did. You pick up the pen. The folder stays on the desk. You sign what you sign. What it says is classified. What it means is that starting today, you belong to something that officially does not exist. That is the first thing the OSS teaches you. What they teach you next will take everything you think you know about yourself and dismantle it completely. Level 2. The trainee. You are still 26, but the person who walked into that office in Washington no longer exists on paper. That took 4 days. One conversation with a photographer, one with a man who never gave his name, and a file that was sealed before the ink dried. They drive you to Bethesda, Maryland. What you expect is a military base. What you get is a golf course. The Congressional Country Club closed its doors to members 6 months ago. From the outside, it still looks like a place where men in linen trousers argue about their handicap. From the inside, it is something else entirely. The fairways have been converted to obstacle courses. The ballroom is a briefing room. The locker rooms are dormitories. This is RTU 11. It does not appear on any government document you will ever be permitted to read. Your class is 14 people. A former circus acrobat from Chicago, a classics professor from Yale, a woman who speaks 5 languages and once worked as a correspondent in Berlin, a boxer from Detroit named Roy Pellegrino, who has the stillest eyes you have ever seen on a man that size. They are not what you expected. That is, you will learn entirely the point. The instructors are British, SOE veterans, most of them. They do not introduce themselves by name. They do not smile. One of them, a thin man with a Liverpool accent and a burn scar along his left jaw, runs your first session at 500 on a Tuesday. He tells you to stand in a line. Then he tells you to sit down on the ground. Then he tells you to stand again. He does this 11 times without explanation. On the 12th time, Pellegrino doesn't move. The instructor looks at him for a long moment. Then he says, "Good." He explains nothing. He walks away. You write it down that night. You're not sure yet what it means. You will be. The weeks that follow are sleep deprivation, stress positions, lockpicking, radio codes, cover story construction, and interrogation simulations that do not feel simulated. They wake you at 0200 with a flashlight and a question. They ask the same question 6 different ways, across 6 different nights. They are not looking for the right answer. They're looking for the moment you stop thinking and start reacting. That moment, the Liverpool instructor tells you, is when you die. 3 weeks in, he stands in front of the group and says that half of you will never set foot in an operational theater. He says it the way someone reads a weather report. Nobody asks which half. You don't sleep that night. Not because you're afraid, because you're already doing the math. Level 3, the operative. You are 27. They move you north in November. No explanation, no timeline. A truck, a train, a second truck. When the trees get dense enough that you stop seeing roads, you know you're close. Area B sits inside the Catoctin Mountains in Maryland, 60 miles from Washington, and a different world entirely. The camp has no sign. The men who run it have no rank insignia. What they have is patience, the specific, unhurried patience of people who have already seen what happens when training gets skipped. This is where they teach you the things that cannot be taught in a ballroom. The first week is weapons. The .32 Colt for concealment. The well-rod pistol, bolt action, suppressed, the quietest weapon produced during this war. You fire it in a stone corridor, and the loudest sound is the brass casing hitting the floor. Your instructor tells you that the well rod was designed for one purpose. He does not elaborate. He does not need to. The second week is demolitions. How to place a charge on a rail line, how to calculate a timer, how to improvise when the timer fails. You learn that the difference between a successful saboteur and a dead one is usually about 30 seconds of forethought. Then comes the jump. They load you into a C-47 at dawn over a field in Virginia. The instructor from Camp X is on the plane. He says nothing during the flight. At the door, he puts one hand briefly on your shoulder. That is all. You step out anyway. The 3 seconds before the chute opens are the most honest 3 seconds you have experienced in your life. No cover story, no alias, no performance. Just you and the ground and the air between them. You land hard, you roll, you stand up. That afternoon, they hand you a new identity. Name, birth date, profession, hometown, family history. A Belgian import merchant named Henri Claus, who has lived in Lyon for 11 years and has a sister in Ghent he hasn't seen since 1938. You read it twice. You memorize it. You read it again. Your instructor watches you and says, "Now forget that you read it. It has to be true, not learned. True." You put the document down. You pick it up as Henri Claus, the man you were born, as steps back. He will not always be easy to find again. Level 4, the asset. You are 27. They fly you to London in January 1943 on a transport plane that smells of engine oil and wet wool. You sit between two men who do not speak for 7 hours. You do not ask their names. That is already becoming automatic. London is not what the newsreels show. The Blitz left gaps in the skyline like missing teeth. Buildings stand next to craters, the way people stand next to graves. Close, quiet, not quite ready to move on. The OSS station operates out of a townhouse on Grosvenor Street that looks like an accounting firm and runs like something else entirely. Your handler is a woman named Margaret Voss. She is 34, originally from Boston, and has been in London since 1940. She speaks German without an accent, and French with a Lyonnaise inflection she spent 2 years acquiring. She is the most controlled person you have ever been in a room with. Not cold, controlled. There is a difference, and she would be the first to tell you so. She briefs you on your first operation in 11 minutes. A contact in Brussels is sitting on signals intelligence that cannot move through normal channels. Your job is to reach an intermediary in a safe house in Soho, collect a physical package, and transfer it to a courier at a specific bench in St. James's Park at 1400 hours the following afternoon. Simple, clean. 2 handoffs, and done. The intermediary's name is Thomas. You will know him by the newspaper under his left arm and the fact that he orders tea and never drinks it. Thomas is exactly where he is supposed to be. The handoff takes 40 seconds. You walk out into a gray London afternoon with a package the size of a paperback novel sewn into the lining of your coat and the steady, deliberate pace of a man who has nowhere particular to be. At the park, the courier is not on the bench. You sit down, you open a newspaper, you wait 17 minutes in the January cold, while every person who walks past that bench becomes for exactly 1 second a problem to be assessed. The courier arrives, the handoff happens. Nobody looks at you twice. That night, back at Grosvenor Street, Margaret reads your debrief in silence. She looks up once. She says, "You waited the right amount of time. Most people don't. You understand then what the training was actually for. Not the locks, not the well rod, not even the jump. It was for those 17 minutes on a bench in St. James's Park, when everything Henri Claus was trained to be had to be real enough to sit still. What comes next will require him to do much more than sit still." Level 5, the shadow. You are 28. They drop you into France on a moonless night in March 1944. You exit the aircraft at 800 feet over a field outside Mâcon and land in mud that swallows your boots to the ankle. 2 members of the local resistance collect your chute in silence. One of them is a farmer. The other is his 14-year-old son. Neither of them look surprised to see you. That is somehow the most unsettling thing about the entire night. Lyon is 70 kilometers south. You take a train. Henri Claus has a room above a textile shop on the Rue Mercière. He has a ration book, a work permit, a landlady named Madame Bertrand, who asks no questions and charges too much for rent. He has a morning routine, bread, ersatz coffee, a walk to the river, that you have rehearsed so many times it no longer feels like rehearsal. That is the point. That has always been the point. The city is occupied, but not broken. Germans move through it the way water moves through a system of pipes, present everywhere, visible at pressure points. The checkpoints are on the bridges, at the station, outside the prefecture. You cross them with your papers and your story, and the particular quality of stillness that Margaret Voss spent 3 months installing in you, like a second skeleton. One morning in April, a Gestapo officer at the Pont Moran takes your papers and holds them longer than usual. He is young, maybe 22. He reads your work permit twice, looks at your face, looks back at the permit. You think about the farmer. You think about his son. You think about the package sewn into your coat on that bench in London and the 17 minutes that taught you what stillness actually costs. He hands the papers back. He waves you through. You walk at the same pace on the other side of the bridge that you walked on this side. You do not exhale differently. You do not change anything. That evening, your network contact, a printer named Edouard Renard from Clermont-Ferrand, does not show at the dead drop on the Rue Auguste Comte. You wait the prescribed time. You leave. The next morning, he is there. He gives no explanation. You don't ask for one. But something is different. A timing that's slightly off. A look held a half second too long. A question about your route that nobody operational would need to ask. You file it away. You say nothing. You sit across from him the next day and share a meal and watch him the way the Gestapo officer watched your papers. Someone in this network is not what they claim to be. You know it the way you knew Henri Claus had to become true rather than learned. Not logic, something older than logic. You have one contact in London you can reach safely. You have 48 hours before the next scheduled operation. The clock is already moving. Level 6, the handler. You are 28. London sends word through a courier you have never met and will never meet again. A single sentence on paper so thin it dissolves in water. It tells you that Edouard Renard has been feeding your network's movement schedule to the milice for 6 weeks. It tells you to cease all contact. It tells you nothing about what happens to him next. You already knew. You just needed someone else to put it in writing. This is the part of the work that no training prepares you for. Not because it is violent, because it is administrative. You update a file. You alter 3 dead drop locations. You send a coded message to 2 assets who trusted Renard and now must be told, without being told, that the perimeter has changed. You do all of this between breakfast and noon on a Tuesday in May. You are now running 4 people. A railway clerk named Simone, who counts German troop movements and leaves the numbers in a hollow behind a loose brick on the Rue Salah. A pharmacist who monitors Gestapo arrest patterns by tracking which families stop collecting prescriptions. A teenage boy who does nothing except walk certain routes on certain days and notice what has changed. And a man whose name you do not know, whose face you have never seen, who leaves film canisters in a bin outside the central post office every Thursday without fail. You have never met 3 of them in person. You are responsible for all of them completely. That responsibility has a specific weight, not dramatic, just present. The way a stone in a coat pocket is present. You stop noticing it until you check and find it gone. If you're watching this and you've made it this far, comment below what you think happens next. Subscribe if you want the rest of the story. We put this out every single day. In June, London sends a second message. A larger operation is moving through your sector. It requires clean channels. To guarantee those channels, 1 asset must be left exposed. They give you 6 hours to decide which one. You sit with that for a long time. You think about the boy who walks certain routes on certain days. You think about what exposed actually means for someone who doesn't know he's been exposed. You make a decision. You write a report. You sign it. That is the moment you understand what handling really is. It is not about running people. It is about carrying the cost of the decisions they never get to make for themselves. The operation succeeds. The asset survives. You will not know that for 4 months. What you don't know yet is that London is about to ask you for something far larger than a name on a report. Level 7, the Saboteur. You are 28. They insert the Jedburgh team on a Thursday night in July 1944. 3 men. You, a British SOE officer named Captain Aldous Price from Cardiff, and a French Army lieutenant called Beaumont, who grew up 12 kilometers from where you land. Beaumont knows every road, every farmhouse, every family name in this valley. That knowledge will matter more than anything the 3 of you are carrying in your kit bags. The mission is a railway junction outside Rouen. 2 lines converge there. One carries fuel north toward German positions retreating from the Normandy front. The other carries men. Cut both, and you don't just slow a convoy, you strand it. You have 4 kilos of plastic explosive, 2 timers, and a resistance cell of 7 people who have been waiting 6 months for exactly this kind of order. The approach takes 2 nights. You move only after dark, through fields and drainage ditches, and once through the back of a barn where a family is asleep 20 feet above you. Price moves like a man who has done this before. Beaumont moves like a man who grew up doing this without knowing it had a name. The placement goes cleanly. Price sets the charges on the northern line. You take the junction switching gear. Beaumont positions the resistance cell along the withdrawal route, 200 meters back, covering both directions. The timer is set for 0200. Withdrawal begins at 0130. At 0118, the southern bridge detonates. Not your charge, someone else's. 40 minutes early and 3 kilometers in the wrong direction, which means the German garrison billeted in Rouen is already awake, already moving, and already between you and the extraction point. Price looks at you. You look at Beaumont. Beaumont says one word in French that does not appear in any field manual. Then he starts moving. You follow him into the dark with 4 kilos of explosives, still live on a junction that will blow in 42 minutes, whether you are clear of it or not. The withdrawal route no longer exists. Beaumont says he knows another way. You have no choice but to believe him. Level 8, the officer. You are 29. Beaumont's route worked. The junction blew at 0200 as planned. The German garrison found a crater and 2 severed rail lines, and nothing else. You were 11 kilometers away by then, moving through a pine forest in the dark with mud on your face, and a British officer who didn't speak for 4 hours straight. That silence, you understood, was not shock, it was processing. The best operational minds you have met in this war think in silence and act in complete sentences. You have started doing the same. London recalls you in August. Paris is liberated on the 25th. The war in France is not over, but it has changed shape, and the OSS is changing with it. You are reassigned to a planning role in a building near Grosvenor Street that has more maps on its walls than the one you started in. Your job is no longer to go into the field. Your job is to send others there. You recruit a young agent named Peter Scholl from a list of candidates that crossed your desk in September. He is 24, from Milwaukee, speaks German natively, French functionally, and has the quality you have learned to look for above everything else. The ability to be completely unremarkable in a room full of people who are trying very hard to notice things. You run him through a shortened version of what you went through, not because there is no time for the full version, because the war has a different shape now, and the training must have a different shape too. You tell him about the 17 minutes on the bench in St. James's Park. You tell him about Henry Kloss. You tell him that the cover has to be true, not learned. He writes it down. You watch him do it, and think about a notebook you have carried since Bethesda, and a British instructor with a burn scar who walked away without explaining himself and trusted you to figure out why. In November, you send Scholl into the field. His first operation is a courier run through Switzerland. Clean, simple, 2 handoffs, and done. He does not come back. The debrief is 3 pages. You write every word of it yourself. You use precise operational language, threat assessment, probable compromise, chain of custody failure at the secondary transfer point. You sign it, you file it, you sit in a building full of maps and think about a 24-year-old from Milwaukee who wrote something down in a notebook and trusted that you knew what you were doing. You will ask yourself for years whether you did. What the war asks of you next will not let you sit with that question for long. Level 9, the ghost. You are 30. Germany surrenders in May. Japan surrenders in August. The war ends the way wars end, not with a single moment, but with a slow, strange decompression, like pressure releasing from something that has been sealed for a very long time. On the 1st of October, 1945, President Truman signs the order that dissolves the Office of Strategic Services, effective immediately. You find out on a Tuesday. Someone pins a typed memo to the board outside the operations room on Grosvenor Street. No ceremony, no address from Donovan, no final briefing. One memo, 12 lines, and 3 years of work that officially never happened, now officially no longer continues. You clean out a desk that has nothing personal in it. That was always the rule. Nothing that connects the space to the person. You were good at that rule. You are realizing now, standing in an empty room with a coat over your arm, that you were perhaps too good at it. The men and women you worked with scatter in a week. Some go to the State Department. Some go home to jobs they left in 1942 and find the shape of them has changed, or that they have, which amounts to the same problem. Some simply disappear, which is, you reflect, a particular skill set this organization spent considerable resources developing. You book a room in a hotel near Victoria Station. You sleep 11 hours the first night. The second night, you don't sleep at all. Roy Pellegrino, the boxer from Detroit with the still eyes, finds you on the 4th day. You haven't seen him since Bethesda in 1942. He looks the same, slightly heavier, the eyes still. He sits across from you in a pub near the station and drinks half a pint without saying anything and then says, "I don't know what to do with quiet." You tell him you know. You sit there for another hour. The quiet between you is not empty. It is full of things that have no language in the world you are returning to. Then a man sits down at your table without being invited. He is wearing a gray suit, not the same man from Washington in 1942. But the same suit, which you understand is not a coincidence. He says there is a new office forming in Washington. No name yet. Mandate still being written. They need people who can operate in the spaces between what governments admit and what they actually do. He looks at you when he says it, not at the table, at you. He says, "We need the kind of person nobody suspects." You have heard those words before. You tell him you need a day to think about it. You already know what you are going to say. Level 10, the architect. You are 31. The office in Washington is on the 4th floor of a building that does not have its name on the door. The carpet is gray. The windows face an interior courtyard. There is a desk, a telephone, and a view of nothing in particular. It feels, in its deliberate anonymity, exactly like home. On the 18th of September, 1947, President Truman signs the National Security Act into law. The Central Intelligence Agency comes into existence at the stroke of a pen. You watch it happen from a room 3 blocks away, reading the language of the mandate the way you once read a cover story, looking for what it says between the lines, which is always where the real meaning lives. What the OSS built, the CIA inherits. The networks, the doctrine. The understanding that the most important battles of a century are fought not on fields, but in the space between what people believe and what is actually true. You helped build those foundations. Not the visible parts, the parts underneath, the ones that hold weight without anyone seeing them, hold it. Donovan is gone from government by now. The man in the gray suit has a title he never uses in conversation. Pellegrino is somewhere in Europe doing something he will not write to you about. Margaret Voss is in Washington, 2 floors above you, running an analytical division with the same controlled precision she brought to a Soho briefing in 1943. You open a new file. You write a name at the top that is not Henri Claus and is not quite fully yours either. Something constructed, something deliberate, something true in the way that only practiced things become true. You think about a golf course in Bethesda converted to something unrecognizable. A stone corridor and a brass casing hitting the floor. A bench in St. James's Park and 17 minutes of stillness that cost more than they looked like they cost. A boy from Milwaukee who wrote something down and trusted you. You think about a man in a gray suit sliding a folder across a desk and asking if you were willing to disappear, not die. Disappear. You understand now what the difference is. You pick up the pen.